Well, that's a thing that happened. Arcade Spirits is a romantic visual novel set in an alternate timeline where the 1983 game crash never occurred. If you're not familiar with that particular historical event, think of it as the reason why Nintendo became the corporate juggernaut that it is today and why you don't see arcades anymore. Well, except in places where the likelihood of getting stabbed with a beer bottle is high. Before getting into the meat of the video, please be aware that I requested and received a review copy of Arcade Spirits from the publisher, P-Cube Limited, for review purposes. With that out of the way, let's kick this video off. In Arcade Spirits, you begin by customizing your character. You can change your name, hairstyle, skin tone, eye and clothing color, and choose a pronoun. I have to say that I was a bit disappointed by the character customization. I was expecting something more complex, or at least the option to choose between different clothing types and styles, but as it stands, it's pretty limited. So right after character creation concludes, you're dropped into the story. In Arcade Spirits, you assume the role of a down-on-their-luck unemployed young adult who has to find a job. Juniper, always the optimist and not to mention perpetually employed roommate, recommends an app that she thinks will help cheer you up and finally break the cycle of shitty dead-end jobs that you've been stuck in since, well, forever. This app called Iris is basically a sort of LinkedIn that can talk to you, which also doubles as a life coach and many other things. We'll get back to Iris in a little bit. After some, what I assume, complex and privacy breaching calculations, Iris determines that the best fit for you would be a job at Funplex, a local arcade. You arrive, go through an interview with this nice old lady called Francine, and congratulations, you're the new floor attendant. Or something like that. That place is crazy. I don't know how it managed to stay in business even with Gavin's skillful accounting. Before we get into the gameplay and story, let's talk about the presentation. The visuals are mostly static with the occasional animation sprinkled on top in key moments. They fit the theme of the game and create a very nice retro modern ambiance. I also like the quality and the detail of the character art. They do a good job of reinforcing each character's unique personality. However, it's worth mentioning that some of the backgrounds are too overused and there are moments when there's a clear disconnect between the text and the visuals. The first example that comes to mind is when one of the characters ends up in the hospital with a life-threatening condition and they're displayed in their everyday attire. Maybe the artist could have thrown a hospital gown or something over the character. It's a small detail, I know, but it almost ruined what was supposed to be an intense and emotional story moment. Look, I'm fully aware that this game was developed by a very small team, so I can't blame them for not working on every tiny little detail, and I know from various graphic designers and artists and even devs how laborious and time-consuming the art creation process is, so yeah. It's not a big deal and it didn't negatively influence the overall experience, but it's just something to consider. Now let's switch over to the gameplay. Being a visual novel, the gameplay is minimalistic and revolves around dialogue, managing personal relationships and dealing with various workplace situations. The Identity Identifier system, or IRIS, can track your relationship statuses with all characters as well as your personality traits. These are quirky, steady, kindly, gutsy, and basically. Yes, that's a trait, literally. Now, the way you quote-unquote level up your traits is through dialogue choices. You can technically pick a trait and go with its respective dialogue choices for the rest of the game, but you'll have to cater your responses according to each character's personality. Some people may appreciate a gutsy response, while others may feel offended and preferred if you take in a more subtle approach. Once you level up one or more traits enough, the game will prioritize some dialogue options while ruling out others. This means that Iris has gathered enough data from the dialogue options you've chosen so far to establish an outline of your personality and rule out the dialogue options that don't fit it. The beauty of this system is that you can't max out all the traits or see everything the game has to offer in terms of content in one playthrough. And this extends to the choices you have to make throughout the story, which can range from which disaster to manage in the arcade, who to hang out with, or who to romance. Speaking of romance, although this game markets itself as a romantic visual novel, I don't really feel that's the case here. The dating elements take up only about a quarter of the game's duration. I don't know, maybe I interpreted the romantic part all wrong and Arcade Spirits has an entire Wuthering Heights inspired subplot that I've missed. Anyway, the dating elements are there more as a bonus than anything else. It's clear that this wasn't the main focus of the game, and if you're not interested in the dating elements, you can go through the game without romancing anyone, so it's cool. And this is just one of the many small choices that you'll have to make in Arcade Spirits. It's very replayable and has multiple branching paths and endings. It also has a surprising amount of content for a small 6-hour game, and I can see myself revisiting it after some time to see how some of the other scenarios play out. Now all that's left to talk about here is the writing, which unsurprisingly is the best aspect of this game. Credit has to go here to the writers, who proved to be very skilled storytellers. Although it's infused with a copious amount of nostalgia and quirkiness, like its themes and visuals, the writing is very layered and nuanced. What I mean by this is that I never expected a visual novel about arcades and retro gaming to address issues such as depression, anxiety and poverty, and much less go so in depth. I mean, okay, the story is mostly about friendship, community, bonding and difficult times and all that jazz, but if you read between the lines, you'll notice this underlying sadness and melancholy. It's difficult to explain and I don't want to spoil the story, but there was this one moment in particular I found especially gutting, where the player character has this monologue about feeling like a failure, about how they can't break the cycle of poverty and bad luck that their family has been stuck in for decades. Yeah, it's not your run-of-the-mill romantic story, it goes into some very dark places. The characters as well are more interesting than I initially thought. Each of them is unique and layered in their own ways and have rich backstories and motivations. They may seem tropey, and they kinda are to some extent, like the shy techie girl who proves to be passionate and determined, or the uptight, rational, by-the-numbers guy who knows when to cut himself some slack and have fun, but they all have enough of an edge to them to be interesting. And that's my take on Arcade Spirits. It's a highly replayable visual novel that tells an engaging story about friendship and the trials and tribulations of young adulthood. I recommend it to everybody, both veterans of the genre and newcomers like me. I've had a great time playing Arcade Spirits and I'm excited to find out more about their next project, which seems to be a direct sequel to Arcade Spirits. Color me interested. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing for more content. See you next time.